So now we're going to start looking at retopology. What that means is we're going to create more efficient geometry in our sculpted mesh. So if I take a look at it now, it's pretty chaotic and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of faces, there's a lot of vertices, and there doesn't necessarily have to be. We can clean this up and simplify it to make it a lot more efficient. And that'll not only help with, having quicker rendering times, but also help with certain things like animation and movement, how these different planes interact when they move. And this will all also, once we kind of reduce this down to what's considered quads, which is typically the name of the game, New General Retopology, is it'll allow us to subdivide it and have different levels of detail depending on our needs. Now, there's different tools that can help with retopology, but I think learning it, the basics in the beginning, will kind of help kind of explain a lot, teach you a lot, and it'll hopefully speed up your workflow later on when you're building out your models. So let's get started. So I'm going to create a plane, and this is going to act as like my skin or my new mesh. And that's really what I want, is I want to create a new skin that's going to be basically made up of a bunch of tiny squares that are as even as possible. This is not always the case, but try to get as close to perfection as we can. So I'll go ahead and scale this down. Let's switch over to edit mode so I don't lose my origin point. And then let's go ahead and move this. And there's different places you could start. You could start, the nose. Some people like to start around the eyes. I like to kind of focus on different regions, like doing this, focus around the top from the eyes through the nose, and then do another one, like a loop around the mouth. And it really, whatever makes the most sense to you. I like to kind of just break it down into chunks and then kind of add everything up later. I'm going to add our mirror modifier just to speed up our workflow, because the face tends to be, oh, wrong one. Just the face tends to be more symmetric than not. And then, so now if I go to edit mode, let's add our clipping, slide this out. It'll be double the work. And now what I'm going to do too is I'm going to add one more. I'm going to go to deform. Then we're going to add a shrink wrap. And in the object I'm going to shrink this to is going to be the head sculpt. And then if I do like a point, let's try 0.01 offset. We might play with this number later on. But now I have these planes that are going to like hug and act like a skin around my base geometry. So let's go ahead and shrink this down a little bit. And as you can see, it kind of autos adjusts. And then what I like to do is kind of create a loop around the eyes. And as you notice, it doesn't fit perfectly, but it gets pretty close. And I'll start pulling away sometimes and try to hug it back. If it gets too out of whack, sometimes what I'll do is I'll go ahead and apply my shrink wrap. I'll create a duplicate and then I'll apply it. So then now the mesh that I'm using, the skin I'm using, is a little bit tighter to my form. And the hardest part is like you kind of have these, you want it to be a grid, but the face is round. So you have these loops in certain areas that are going to be moving a lot more than others, such as like the eyes and the mouth, just to give it some flexibility and also just to fit with the shape of that region. And what I might do too to speed things up or make it a little bit easier to see is kind of add some color to this. There's different ways to do it, but kind of based off our past knowledge, let's just add a gray base material to our face. I'm going to turn down the shininess or the roughness. It might be a little dark, but that's okay. Let's go more like a neutral gray. And if we wanted to, we can make this one different as well. And maybe do like a nice teal color, something that stands out to make it easier to kind of notice the new skin. All right, so now I'm going to go and continue this loop. And let's go ahead and continue down around the nose and mouth region. So I'll extrude down. Now let's start actually trying to do this a little bit more efficient, like selecting whole loops at a time, then even shrinking and scaling them down. So a couple of things that might help you as you're moving along. One of those things is a subsurface modifier. This makes it a little bit easier to visualize how this will actually fit a little bit better onto your base mesh. Now, I tend to turn this on and off as I'm working because it doesn't, keep in mind, this isn't actually where your geometry is going, but it does kind of give you this cleaned up version of it. Another thing that I tend to do is I'll go over to sculpt mode and I'll actually have a relax slide tool. And this will allow me to kind of move my shapes around a little bit in a more organic fashion. So I can kind of get them in a better spot that is more evenly distributed throughout the rest of my mesh. And again, I might have to go back and adjust some of these if I get done with it in the edit mode, but it does kind of allow me to space these things out in a little bit more fluid fashion. And then one thing to consider is how everything's kind of fitting between these loops, how they're starting to change direction, because you want to have these things to kind of start forming into a grid. So some of these will kind of branch off and start helping you kind of form that shape um, from the loop off into more of a grid. And then you're going to start connecting these looped areas together with the grid. And you might even start refining some of the geometry after you kind of have this point where like I'm looking at it, I might move my eyes in a little bit more. I might even want to, accentuate this mouth crease as well. And then I'll probably start working on the ear and then connecting the rest of the head to fit that until it flows down the neck. And then you'll have, holes in the eye sockets to make room for your eyeballs, as well as the bottom of like the neck and the shoulder area to kind of make room for when we start connecting the body as well.